What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical average American here today to react and continue learning about the weirdest things about Canada, part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, feel free to go check that out or stop and just stay right here, relax, enjoy part 2. That's perfectly fine, but there's a lot of weird stuff going on in part 1, I'll tell you. Canada got some weird stuff going on, including, man, I learned about all 1,000 different ways you can use the word A. Like, A is very Canadian, and it's got a lot of utility. It's actually impressive, honestly, what you can do with A. About the Tragically Hip, why they're so beloved in their story. Canadian currency, pennies? Apparently, Canada has given up on the penny. Pennies no longer exist in Canada. You heard it here first. Or at least, I had no idea about that. That kind of, I had to process that for a while. No pennies. Canada's relationship to the British Empire and why milk is sold in bags. Finally learned about the reason why milk is sold in bags in some parts of Canada. I can finally sleep at night. I finally found that one out. Okay, so that was a big relief. So I'm excited to learn about what other weird things are going on in Canada in the best way possible. These are so fascinating. I mean, never be normal. I mean, that goes for the entire world, huh? That's kind of one of the best things about this Earth, that all us countries are so different and strange and weird in our own ways. So let's see what else you're doing weird, Canada. So let's take a look.
Number 5. What's the deal with Canadian sports? In many parts of Canada, it can get very cold in the winter, and while Canadians will complain about the cold, they often embrace it and celebrate it. In fact, 2 of Canadians' favourite games are winter games that are played on ice. The first, which should be obvious, is ice hockey.
There's two famous winter sports in Canada that are played on ice. I definitely would have said hockey. As a matter of fact, that's one of the few things all Americans do know about Canada, is that hockey is very popular. What's the other? Is it curling? Like, I know about curling. Is it actually popular?
According to a national poll, 53% of Canadians are fans of the NHL. Compare that to Americans and the NFL, where only 49% of Americans consider themselves a fan of the NFL.
That's actually a really interesting stat. That's actually really interesting. That actually helps me understand how popular Canada is in hockey. No, how popular hockey is in Canada. Because I know how many people like the NFL here in America. And there's a little more of the percentage of the population of Canadians likes hockey. That's actually fascinating. That's a lot.
However, what is odd is that Canada doesn't have a national professional hockey league. They do have the Canadian Hockey League, which comprises of 3 junior leagues. Junior means that the players are between the ages of 16 and 21. But beyond that, they don't have a place for professionals over the age of 21 to play, like the Continental Hockey League, KHL in Eurasia, or even the United States, which has the American Hockey League, a farm system for the NHL.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting. It's cool that Canada has such a robust junior hockey league, but is that to like develop and kind of mentor young Canadian hockey talent? It's purely selfish. It's so that Canada can continue to mass produce these Canadian hockey studs.
There is currently only one Canadian team in the AHL, and that's the Toronto Marlies. Perhaps you're thinking that this isn't that weird. Canada only has a population of 35 million people, and maybe they can't sustain a professional hockey league. Well, that may be true, but they do have their own professional football league and a basketball league.
That is very weird to me. Canada doesn't have a professional hockey league? Is that what he is? Am I understanding this correctly? Canada doesn't have a professional hockey league? How can that possibly be true? Is it because, like, a lot of professional Canadian hockey players join the NHL? Or something like that? But there's a professional football league?
The Canadian Football League has 9 teams, and they play a 20-week schedule.
And we're not even talking about soccer, which I assumed. We're talking about football. like what Americans think of when you say football. There's a Canadian Football League? I didn't even know that!
Its rules are similar to the rules of the NFL, except the balls are bigger and the goal lines are 110 yards apart, and the end zones are 20 yards, and they have one less down.
Wow, I didn't know there was so much about Canadian sports that I did not know about. That's actually really interesting.
As for the Canadian Basketball League, it was started in 2011 and has 10 teams. The second winter sport the Canadians love is a game more boring to watch than golf.
No, stop. Okay. All right, I was correct. It is curling. The narrator is saying it's incredibly boring. I think Americans would struggle to have the attention span to watch curling if curling was on television all the time, but it only comes on American television every 4 years when the Winter Olympics is on, and at that point it's so novel and different, like, you'll find me and other Americans actually, like, plopped down on the couch, like, the curling's on! Everyone stop! The curling is on! Quiet! And but yeah, it's interesting. It's like ice rock darts. So, there you go. Put that in the Wikipedia description.
This is curling. There are 1 million people in the world that curl, and 90% of them are in Canada. And
Wow.
in case you're wondering,
Wow, 90% of curling is in Canada? I really didn't know that it was such a Canadian sport. Like, I knew it was played in Canada, but it's very, very Canadian.
yes, in Canada, some curlers are celebrities. Number 4, why does Canada have different flavored chips? Yes,
Yeah.
some Canadian brands of chips have flavors based on Canadian food, like
They have poutine chips. Poutine Ruffles chips. I I have a lot of questions. Well, I would say why, but then it's just like, why not? Part of me is just like, why not? Why the heck not? I am so curious. Can you really capture the taste of poutine in a chip? That is the question.
poutine and maple syrup, but they also have 2 flavors that are made by Frito-Lay that aren't Canadian in nature, but are rarely found outside of Canada.
Yes. These aren't Canadian and oh, like they're not maple syrup or poutine. They don't have some kind of aspect of Canadian culture. But these chips like are very much associated with Canada, all dressed. Who knows what that means? And ketchup, which almost sounds like a chip that would be popular in America, but since it is totally not found here, it actually comes across as kind of disgusting sounding. Don't quote me, like, I don't know, they could be great. I mean, they must be because they're still in business, but it's very Canadian.
These are ketchup and all dressed. Ketchup
Yeah.
is pretty self-explanatory, except that they don't really have an overwhelming ketchup taste. They are sweet, but also very salty. The reason that
Oh, man, you know what? That's probably very important to actually making it a good chip. Ketchup is a very ketchupy taste, dare I say. And if it was too strong, it'd probably be gross. So it's just like a hint of ketchup. That actually makes sense.
the ketchup chips are popular in Canada but aren't found elsewhere is because for decades the best-selling brand of chips in Canada was the Canadian-based Hostess potato chips, and one of their most popular flavors was ketchup.
Oh, Canadian-based Hostess chips. Never heard of that. That's a Canadian chip brand? And they kind of single-handedly made ketchup-flavored chips popular in Canada, basically? That's really cool. I have always wondered why ketchup flavor chips? Why is that so popular in Canada, of all places? Why? And it's like, basically thanks to Hostess?
In the 1980s, Hostess teamed up with Frito-Lay, and eventually the Hostess brand lost its value, and their chips, which included ketchup chips, were rebranded as Lay's. The second kind, which was sold for a short time in the United States in 2015 and can still be found in stores now and then, is All Dressed.
All dressed. I've never seen all dressed chips in an American store. I could not tell you what flavor all dressed means. I mean, what is on the packaging here? It's powders, there's some sauce, and a liquid. If I was a little more capable with like cooking supplies and ingredients, I think I would be able to reason out what this stuff is, but it's a chip that's got a lot of different flavors to it. Number 1 flavor in Canada. Is that true? All dressed.
It's a combination of paprika, tomato, salt, vinegar, onion, sour cream, ketchup, and barbecue, which gives it
What? What? All right, Canadians, you're weird. You're officially weird. Like, there's no other way to say it. You enjoy this? What did he just say? What is in these chips?
States in 2015 and can still be found in stores now and then is all dressed. It's a combination of paprika, tomato, salt, vinegar, onion, sour cream, ketchup, and barbecue, which gives it a sweet and salty taste that is hard to explain.
Sweet and salty taste that is hard to explain. There you have it. Okay. Sounds very interesting. I mean, it's popular, right? It's very popular. That package said it was the most successful selling flavor, so it must be good.
Nevertheless, it is quite popular in Canada. According to Ruffles' website, All Dressed is the #1 flavor of chip in Canada. Unfortunately, we couldn't find out why All Dressed is only available in Canada. However, based on speculation alone, it could be because All Dressed has ketchup seasoning, and as we just mentioned, ketchup chips are usually only found in Canada.
Yeah, I think it's because, well, kind of like what I'm expressing, just reacting to it. I can't look at the package and even understand what the flavor is. There's like a barrier there of knowing what I'd even be buying. So trying to sell all dressed chips to Americans would just be so difficult because there'd be this big learning process or information gap where they'd be in the stores and Americans would be like, I don't know what the heck that means, all dressed. So they probably wouldn't sell very well, even if the flavor is good.
Number 3, why do they always say sorry?
Canada is known for saying sorry. I guess you could technically say that is weird. It's weird that there is a country that is known for saying sorry more, that it seems to be kind of accurate, and why that exists in Canada in particular. I mean, it's a very, very good sign. Like, it's a very good thing. Canadians are very polite. I mean, it's good. But why?
Besides another word that Canadians use a lot is sorry. However, that can often be followed up with an A, just like sorry. It's a versatile word to Canadians. In the book, How to Be a Canadian, even if you already are one, there is a...
What is this? A book on how to be Canadian, even if you're already Canadian. Is this real?
Whole chapter on mastering the word. They identify 12 different ways it can be used. Simple, essential, occupational, subservient, aristocratic, demonstrative, libidinous, ostentatious, mythical, unrepentant, sympathetic, and authentic.
So it's like A. It's like when Canadians use A, sorry has a lot of different meanings and use cases. Simple, essential, mythical? Sorry. How do you make it mythical?
One reason the Canadians apologize is that it's part of their culture of politeness. But it's also a quick way to smooth over problems and keep relationships positive. Another theory is that Canadians do it as a way to show that they aren't Americans. As Joseph...
Okay. All right. What's the easiest way to show that we are not Americans? We are not like those Americans. We'll actually be polite and considerate and respectful and say sorry. That's how. Then no one will be confused. Yeah, it's true.
Breen of the National Post wrote, sorry is a totem of niceness with a sly undertone of superiority. It announces both our presence and the fact that we feel slightly bad about it. It also subtly asserts that cultural appearances notwithstanding, we are not American.
Okay.
It also says that it's
Okay, I'm sorry. There, you got me saying it. Sorry. Geez, okay.
rather different from the empty sorry that British people will say, which is where Canada inherited much of its language, and it is also much different than the American John Wayne style of forgiveness, where that is associated with weakness. Number 2.
Right. No saying sorry here in America, or you're just gonna get ran right through. I mean, I don't think it's that Americans, it wouldn't be crazy to say sorry. It would be unexpected. It's not expected. Saying sorry in America, it's perfectly fine, but no one is gonna be upset if you don't. That's the best way I can describe it. So honestly, like I was saying, it just seems like a Canadian cultural thing. Just a bit more demonstrative of respect within like the Canadian community, basically, just a bit more respectful, which is it's a good thing. It's a great thing.
2. What's the deal with poutine? To many non-Canadians or people who've never tried it, poutine can look pretty unappetizing.
No. That's where he's wrong. I've said this before. I feel like this is one of the greatest kept secrets of Canadian culture. I think Americans would love poutine. Whenever I tell any of my friends about poutine or what it is, I'm just out there in America running up to people. You gotta know what poutine is! And they're like, please, leave me alone. I'm like, no, it's fries and cheese curds and gravy. Americans, I've told, are like, that sounds fantastic. And I think, like, that sounds fantastic. So, no, Americans, I think, would love it. I don't know why it's not popular.
When Jay Pritchett saw it on Modern Family, he said,
well, it looks like vomit, so I'm not poutine it in my mouth.
Fair enough, after all, it's gravy made from animal fat, or even better, mushroom and root broth that is mixed with flour and then poured over fries with cheese curds sprinkled on it.
That's fine. He's not going to get me trying to describe it, make it sound gross. It's not. It's good. And Americans really like gravy a lot. So it's already kind of one foot in the door for us. We already love gravy.
So yes, it's crispy fries with liquid poured on it, which sounds like a pretty soggy mess. However, if Canadians even see a picture of poutine, some of them will start to drool like Homer Simpson. Poutine is available at many fast food restaurants in Canada, like McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, and Harvey's, which is a Canadian fast food chain.
Yeah, thinking about poutine being getting it from a fast food place makes me a little skeptical. Thinking about getting it like in a cardboard thing like this that's been sitting out, and that would make me a little, is fast food poutine okay? Like, I have wondered that.
Even Costco serves it in their food court. Of course, you wouldn't be surprised to learn that there is a chain of restaurants that serves exclusively poutine. Oddly enough,
Poutineery. It says poutineery.
You wouldn't be surprised to learn that there is a chain of
Smokes poutineery. I love that word. Poutineery.
Of restaurants that serves exclusively poutine. Oddly enough, though, you can't get poutine at Tim Hortons. The origin of poutine is debated, but the adding of cheese curds to fries and gravy is often credited to Bernard Lachance of Café Ideal in Warwick, Quebec. In 1957, regular customer Eddie Lannes asked for the cheese curds to be added to fries, and Lachance said, and I apologize to all the French people watching, but ça va te faire un maudit poutine, and in English that means that will make a damned mess. From there, the popularity.
So, I mean, it'll make a mess, but he did it anyway? And, consequently created one of the most beloved dishes in Canadian history? That's kind of a cool story.
Of the dish grew, and it has become the most famous Canadian food. As for why it's so popular, well, that's apparently because it's delicious. Number 1.
Yeah, it looks delicious. Okay, number 1, weird thing about Canada. Why are Canadians so polite? Oh, okay. I mean, we already went over why Canadians say sorry. This is kind of branching off of that. Why are Canadians so polite? I mean, is he actually going to be able to explain the genesis of, like, why as a culture Canadians are polite? Like, why? Is there a why?
Why are Canadians so polite? One stereotype you always hear is that Canadians are nice and polite. However, if you were to ask Canadians if this is true, they would deny it or say that the stereotype is overblown, and then they'd probably apologize for potentially seeming curt. So, is it true? And if so, why are they so polite? An article by Cassandra Solarsky of the Canadian Press tried to answer the question, but the problem is that measuring niceness across a country is really hard to do.
I am so glad that he's actually getting into this in this way. I have numerous times said, yes, I believe Canada as a country is nicer on average than definitely America, but lots of countries. But I wonder if there's any data to support this. I wonder if he's actually going to be able to talk about any studies or data that would support, like empirically, Canadians are more polite as a culture than other cultures.
In one attempt, researchers compared the language used on Twitter by Canadians and Americans. They found that the words used...
They measured The language they used on Twitter. Okay.
Researchers compared the language used on Twitter by Canadians and Americans. They
Okay.
found that the words used by Canadians were gentler, nicer, and generally more positive. On the other hand, as we mentioned, Canadians
Okay.
tend to think of themselves as superior to Americans. They may not say it flat out, especially if there are Americans around, but behind closed doors, Canadians can stereotype Americans as ignorant, gun-toting, warmongering religious zealots who drink weak beer. They
Oh my god. Man, that was a mouthful. Okay, so aside from all the what Canadians think of Americans, he was saying there was in fact a study where they studied language on Twitter, and Canadians, on average, in that study, were using kinder, softer, more respectful language. So there you go. That's the first thing I've ever heard of that actually scientifically supports it.
even have a popular country song about the beer part. For example, on a segment on a satirical news show on the government-subsidized CBC, comedian Rick Mercer would interview Americans and ask them about untrue and ridiculous things about Canada. For example, he would ask Americans to record a congratulatory message to Canada on building a dome over the national igloo. He even got the then governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, to say it.
That that is actually really funny. Oh no, not more Americans making fools of themselves. No.
He also got George W. Bush, who was running for president, to thank Prime Minister Jean Poutine for his support. The segments were so
John Poutine. John Poutine. This looks hilarious.
popular that it was made into a 1-hour special. Isn't that nice? So, while it is debatable if Canadians are nice or not, what is even less clear is why the stereotype exists. Our guess
Yeah.
is something called the fragment theory, which is when a colonial country keeps some old world sensibilities. This makes Canadians conservative and deferential, which could be construed as polite. A second theory is that the
Interesting. Wow, I like that he's actually trying to give a couple of theories for why Canadians are polite, other than not just at the surface level of Canadians are polite because it's a good thing to be, and it's a good thing for a community and culture of people to do, and it makes everyone happier and kind of more successful in all sorts of different aspects when everyone's working together and kind. That's like the why on the surface, because it's a good thing to be polite. But I like that he's kind of getting into why are Canadians as a culture, when did that start? How did that begin? Like, if Canada could have been anything since the creation of Canada, like, Canadians could have been the most impolite people on earth, but instead they're the most polite. Why is that?
foundation of Canada was English, French, and the Aboriginal people who coexisted with each other using tolerance and politeness, and those traditions have carried on into modern Canadian society.
Okay, so it was just beneficial to be polite, starting back at the earliest points of Canadian history? That's a good reason.
Finally, it could just be because Canada is a really vast place and the elements can be pretty harsh. Let's say someone's car breaks down on some rural road in northern Ontario where cell phone service is spotty at best on a cold winter's night. The person has to hope that the next car coming along is going to help, or things are going to get really bleak. So perhaps Canadians are nicer because the elements of their country make them more dependent on their fellow Canadian, so being tolerant and polite to others was, as is, a matter of survival to Canadians because you never
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. It's just beneficial to Canada and Canadians to be polite for all sorts of different reasons. He's kind of citing, since Canada is cold and kind of treacherous in places, being polite can benefit you as well, and it benefits your neighbor, and that makes sense too.
know who the next person coming down the road is. So I really hope you liked that video. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. And don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos just...
That was good. That was quite good. That was by Top Tens, and I gotta give that a like, because I enjoyed that immensely. It's funny. This video is titled Things About Canada That the Rest of the World Finds Weird. Weirdest things about Canada. And although these things are weird, they're all good and interesting and unique and positive, honestly. There was not one thing in here that was weird in a bad way. So this was actually very, very fun and very interesting. And like I was saying, it's one of the best things about the existence of countries, different countries around the planet, is that we're all different and weird in our own ways. And I just think it's so fun to learn about these unique things about Canada, because a lot of Americans, well, it's funny, because Americans will say, oh, Canada is so different in this way, oh, and some people will say, oh, Canada and America, oh, it's so similar, what's the difference? So highlighting these weird, quote-unquote, aspects of Canada are really beneficial, honestly, and cool, and really highlight some of the fascinating, fun things about Canada. So I enjoyed this quite a bit. Anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and Canadian culture, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.